as I think we mentioned at the last IACTED meeting, so typically there is not a May meeting for IACTED. So being able to work it out this way, that we kind of take and do a May webinar on the IACTED meeting date, I think kind of works out better for everybody else. But before we kind of dive into our update, I did want to give both Laura and Bill, if there was some updates that you needed to share, or if there was anybody else from like the executive team that needed to share, we can do that real quick first.
Tony, this is Laura. Sarah sent us an email this morning with a almost complete agenda for our summer conference, and hopefully we'll be able to send that out this week. And Sarah, you can update me on that if that is not correct. And that's all I have, and Bill may have something else to add.
Perfect. Bill? Bill, did you have something you wanted to add? Or I saw you came on camera, but you're still muted. There you go.
The only thing we wanted to mention was that we're finalizing the summer conference agenda, and I think that'll be ready toward the end of next week so that everyone can see when different events are taking place for both the pre-conference and the conference. So Sarah, Nicodemus, and the others are working on that. Aside from that, we don't really have any announcements to add, so we'll let you take over and run the meeting.
All right, and we should have plenty of time at the end if there's any questions. But are there any questions specific about the summer conference before we dive into that? All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just on our webinars, we've told you that we just want to kind of keep everything kind of in terms of like what's being happening here. So on our director's calendar, we had said adoption and waiver forms were due on the 1st. I think there's been a couple people that have kind of called in and asked us like, well, can I have a little bit more time? You can have a little bit more time. The one thing that I would share with you that I would want you to understand about the adoption forms is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is just remember that we are going to roll that data and information from your adoption forms into your local application. So that's part of the reason why we needed to get those done around the 1st of May or something. So that is really just for your Perkins managed programs. The ones that are taking place at your high school, we can work on those a little bit later. The Awards for Excellence took place on May 3rd. It was, I know there was quite a few of you that were there. It was another outstanding event. We were really, really fortunate to have Dr. Sue Ellspermann be our keynote speaker. So that was great to kind of bring that level of attention to the event. And we hope to continue to kind of move forward with that. Again, I would share thanks with the IACT group for helping to kind of facilitate and host that event. Since moving it out to the Marriott East and just having it off the government campus site has been much better in terms of what we were trying to do. We're going to talk about GANs here by the end of the month. We'll talk about that a little bit. Probably not going to quite hit that target date, but we'll do the best that we can. So in June, obviously that date will have to be pushed back a little bit. Jed and Chris have already started their spring completion data trainings. So hopefully you have already scheduled what training session you're going to, or your data people have scheduled what data session that you're going to. And then keep in mind that, no matter how much change and transition is taking place in our office, that date of encumbering all of your Perkins funds by June 30th does not change. So that kind of takes effect. And then July 1 will be the start of the new fiscal year. We'll see how many times I can say the word physical instead of fiscal throughout this process. But so I'm already at 1. Just wanted to touch a little bit on there. You saw the annual reviews. Wanted to touch a little bit on that new process that will be starting. If you're asking, well, why a new process? What was wrong with the old process? Basically, we were told, hey, you've got to monitor and review everybody. Obviously, that doesn't mean that we do an on-site review for everybody. So what we are going to do is June and July, we've given out those like rubrics or those score sheets, and we will go through and we will evaluate the information that we have on hand, and we will come up with a score that will identify for us, hey, who do we need to kind of select for doing like a digital audit. We'll follow up on those in October and December. And then from those results, then we will conduct the phase 2 monitoring, which is the actual on-site visits through February to April. But so what we're really looking at is that initial review is a review of all the eligible recipients. So like we'll be going through your local applications and your grant questions and your adoption forms and your data that you submitted to just kind of get a feel for, hey, does everything kind of seem to be in order there? And where might there be a need for some assistance on our end? So that is coming up. June and July, the ideal there is it's going to be happening. It's nothing that you're going to have to focus on or anything like that. You're not going to have to provide documentation at that point. Now, when we get into October and December and we do some of the digital audits, there may be some forms that you have to submit to us along those lines. I am guessing that most of everybody's questions is what is going to happen now that Jairus has taken a position with another company or another organization, and a little bit about like what's going to happen as we try to transition over to the Commission for Higher Ed starting on July 1st as a part of 1002. First of all, we've already posted a Director of Grants position on our website. We wanted to try to get that up as quickly as possible, just knowing that sometimes positions are hard to fill anyway. We really are hoping to have someone in place by the middle of June. That, you know, everybody on our end, our SPD, even CHE has been involved in these conversations and understand the urgency that we need to get somebody into that position to be able to help process some of this. The all hands on deck part kind of really applies more to our office, but Kathleen is, we're kind of in that until we got into the annual reviews and stuff. She's going to be able to help us with the reimbursement requests. She had already taken on some duties internally that used like the vFire system and putting in invoices and some of those things. So it only made sense for us to kind of bring her on board. The other thing is we think that this is an opportunity for us to make sure that we don't want to have, we did not have a backup plan for Jairus's role and Jairus's position. And I think this will be really good for us to have some people in the office then that are very well aware of, like, this is the process, this is what needs to happen. Chris and Jed are doing a great job of kind of overseeing the local applications to make sure that we're moving forward with that process as well, and that we get that information as completed as quickly as possible. The one thing I would like to share with you, though, is we don't want to change anything right now for the end of this fiscal year. So everything that we're doing for the end of this fiscal year is going to basically remain the same. So like there is no, like, we're not going to come up with new forms. We're not going to come up with new processes and stuff like that. We are going to follow the old processes to the best of our ability, just the way that we have. It would take too much time for us to evaluate the current processes and try to come up with something different. But we will use this opportunity to kind of say, okay, going forward for like the next fiscal year, for the next local application, what might make this more efficient or easier to manage? How can you help? And I think this is really important. So obviously our goal is to keep everything flowing until we get somebody new in place. If you can help us out by doing some of these things, it will be really helpful in terms of making sure that we don't get bogged down in nitty-gritty details and get off track of what we're trying to do. Also, it'll make sure that we don't get overwhelmed. So one, at least for the next couple of weeks here, try to only submit the most urgent reimbursement requests. And if you are doing this, like what I'm really saying there is, please don't submit a reimbursement request for like $200,000 or $300,000 for the month of April, May, and April and May, because that's going to take us forever to go through that documentation and kind of sort out. Even if you can break that up into a couple of, 2 or 3 smaller pieces, that it'll make it easier for us to make the connections, that would be really helpful. Take a little extra time here to provide complete documentation. I don't think this will be a big lift because I know that this is one of, you've already been providing complete documentation, but Jairus was really good about being able to look at your documentation. She knew like what your policies were. She knew where to find all those documents. That's going to take us a little bit longer. So if there's anything that you can do on your end to help provide a justification, make it as straightforward as possible, help us to see the connections between what you're submitting for and the uses, that'll make the procedures go much more quickly. And then lastly, be sure to take note of what we share today. There are a couple of small changes. For example, like don't email Jairus. Like that may cause things to get lost. So as we dive into that, I'm going to go through this from our perspective on what the biggest priorities are. If we have this wrong, this is where we can use some feedback from you to say, okay, but what about this? And that I fully anticipated that we're going to have some questions here today. First of all, budget mods to me are one of the highest priorities that we have, because you need to have the budget modification approved in order to turn around and get things ordered before the end of June. So you're still going to send in the budget modification request form, but you are sending it to cte@gov.in.gov. And then what we are going to do is we are going to funnel it from that site. So that is our best chance of making sure that it doesn't get buried in my inbox. It doesn't get lost someplace along those lines. So keep in mind, everything for right now is going to go to cte@gov.in.gov. Help us out by, if you're doing a budget modification, don't just write 1 or 2 or 3 quick words or something like that about why you're doing the budget modification. Tell us a little bit more details. Also, be sure to include like how that budget modification applies to like the activities that were approved, and how does that apply to like your CLNA, because without that information, we can't approve it, right? It's got to align with your CLNA, and it's got to meet size, scope, and quality for us to approve it. I'm not asking for a doctoral dissertation there. I'm just asking you put in a little bit more detail maybe than you would share with Jairus, because Jairus is going to know. It's going to take us longer if we have to do this. The goal will be we will try to get those back to you within 2 or 3 days of those being submitted. So as soon as we're done today, if you want to start submitting those to cte@gov.in.gov, by all means, start submitting those if you have those budget mods that are in place. So that's number one. Number 2, reimbursement requests. The process may take just a little bit longer to process than what it has in the past, but what we found out yesterday in talking with our budget agency and centralized accounting, it can't take that much longer. Because if it goes over a certain period of time, which I think is like 35 business days is what we were talking about. If it goes over 35 business days, we have to pay a late payment. I do not want to be the one that is having to explain why we are paying late payments because we didn't get a reimbursement request process. So just kind of keep that in mind with you as we go through some things and as we hear some things. But so again, reimbursement request forms, same form. The only thing that's different is you're sending it to that CTE@gov web or email instead of sending it directly to Jared's. Provide similar documentation to what you have been sharing. The clearer it is, the easier for us it will be to process. So if we can look at it and we can say, this is the usage, the allowable usage that you were intending to use to justify that expense. And then we can take a look at the actual expense and say, yeah, that matches, then we're in good shape. So if there's anything like that you can do to help us out, we would appreciate it. Again, for the next couple of weeks, we're not telling you not to send any in. I know what time of year it is. I know what your bookkeepers are doing. I get all of that. But do the best you can to send in, the most urgent ones. And even if you have to break them down into smaller ones, I think that'll make it easier for us to process than like one huge one.
Hey, Tony.
Yep.
When you want allowable usage, are you talking about section 135 or are you talking about the GAN?
The section 135.
All right.
So that, because what our role in this process is, we're just making sure that it's allowable. All right. From there, once we've determined that it's allowable and that you have the proper documentation, then we input it into the system, and then centralized accounting takes care of the processing and the payment for us. All right. So, but centralized accounting doesn't know anything about Perkins, and they wouldn't know whether it was allowable or not. So they can't do that part. So that's what I'm saying is, if you can do some little things to kind of help us out and say, okay, this was, professional development, and, specifically item number like B2 or something like that. That'll really help us out, because that'll, we can just go right there and say, yep, that looks like to us, it applies. They've got a receipt, they've got a PO, they've got an invoice. We're in good shape here. Any other questions about the reimbursement requests?
Tony, if we attach it or identify which activity it comes from, our grant, those are already attached to section 135 usages. Is that sufficient, or do we need to go in and pull those usages and pull it even further out?
No, if you can just make sure that it says that somewhere on there that we know what you were intending. I think the reality is, Sarah, and this goes back to like just our review of the applications. Sometimes in your activity statements, you don't always share exactly how that funding is going to be used. And I'm not saying you, I mean, just in general, there are times when like we don't get a complete picture of exactly how that money will be used. And then we don't necessarily see that connection between, well, how is that B2 or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right, local applications. So Chris and Jed have been going through these. I know this is a little challenging right now because we're sending them back for a couple of different things. We are sending them back if they need an update to the improvement plan, but we're also sending them back if they needed an update on like some of your activities that were included in the local application. Now, not as many needed an update on the activities that were included because most of your activities were carryover activities from last year. So we're in pretty good shape on some of those, on most of those items. Jed and Chris have shared that we have returned about 12 or 15 applications. Of those 12 or 15, I think 4 or 5 have already returned those to us. That's a good thing. I just wanted to go through. If you go into Inters and you look on the site and there is a blue initial final at the end of your application, what that means is your application is approved. You're good to go. If there is a cream colored initial modify, that means we need you to make changes to it or make some modifications to your application and then resubmit it. And until you resubmit it, we can't make any, we can't approve it, we can't make any comment. All right. And then if yours is pink, what that means is you, Chris, you may need to help me out here. That means that like it's still being reviewed for the first time, right? It's on us, right? If it's pink, it's in our hands.
If it's in review status, that just means
It's in our hands. We're reviewing it. There's none that are first time at this point, but it just means that it's now in our hands to review and either approve it or send it back.
Okay. So blue, you're approved, you're good to go. Cream means that we are waiting on you to send it back to us with modifications. Pink means you are waiting for us to review it. All right. And we're going to try to get these to all be blue here very soon. Obviously, it's really going to be hard for us to get GANs out for before the middle of June. All right. For the local applications. The other thing is, keep in mind, I don't know exactly how this is going to work. Because we are transitioning over to the commission on July 1, that may push our GANs back just a little bit as well, because we can't set those grants up. We have to set those grants up with CHE. We can't set those grants up through the cabinet like we have over the last 4 or 5 years. All right, but we're still going to hope that we can have all the paperwork. We can get those to you in mid-June. You can get us our signatures that we need back, and we'll be good to go. Some other items here that we are looking at. Pair forms, and I am assuming that we have a whole file full of pair forms that we need to review. My understanding of that is these are pair forms that you are planning to use to make purchases before the June 30th encumbrance deadline. Can somebody let me know, is that an accurate assumption?
Yes, that's what that means.
Okay, thank you. So that'll kind of, the pair forms with the budget mods will kind of rise to the top of our priority. We will take a look at those and we will kind of keep moving forward with that. The post-secondary reserve grant award notifications. I know Mark is on here. I think maybe Stephanie is on here as well from Vincennes. We are still working to get those sent out. We're hoping to get those sent out by the end of this week for you on that. No problem with the funding. It's on our end trying to figure out exactly what steps have to be taken in order to, I mean, we can send you a piece of paper that says, hey, you have this much money, but it may not have any validity behind it until we get the money placed where it needs to go. So we need to do that. Leadership grants, Dr. Lazarus, I see you on here. Maybe IACTE's on here. This is our CTSOs. All of those are going to be, it's probably going to be right around like middle of June or July before we start to process those, just because, again, we have to set those up over at the commission rather than through the cabinet. And then the one other thing that I wanted to put on here, so one of the things that Chris is going to work on is we're going to work on creating like a digital version of the GAN, the grant award notification. And we're going to try to incorporate like electronic signatures on there. We would like to make this a little bit easier for you to be able to submit those. So that's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. Going forward for next fiscal year, we very much will probably look at having like a digital like reimbursement request form and something that stays, that we always have a record of it right there in Indy Grants. And so we don't have to worry about saving it to files and tracking it like 3 or 4 different places. So there may be some things going forward, like starting with the next fiscal year, that some forms may change and some of those things, and we will come back to those a little bit later on. All right, we'll introduce those to you. I think that is all I've got as far as the fiscal transition. Are there questions that you have for us about any of that information? Or is there anything that we have missed that like they didn't even talk about this, they should have?
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I thought I just heard you say June 30th was the deadline to encumber new items, correct?
The pair forms, yes.
Okay. So I'm a new director. So I thought April 30th was the deadline.
April 1st, it's actually April 1st, wasn't it?
Tony,
It's
April
already-
30th is for the deadline for the pair forms to exceed $5,000 in a piece of equipment. And the last day of June is the last day that you can encumber funds for the grant cycle for this period.
Right. So what our assumption is, Brandon, what we were saying is, so if you are purchasing something over $5,000 and you want to purchase that piece of equipment before June 30th of this year, then you have to have an approved pair form. And
Okay.
several of you have submitted pair forms that have not been approved yet. Now,
So if
starting
it's
July
less than-
1, if you're wanting to purchase equipment after July 1, that's over $5,000, then you'll have to have a pair form in before you purchase that equipment.
And that would be for next year, correct? For the next.
That would be
year's
for
money,
next
correct?
year.
Okay. So if it's still less than 5,000, then we still encumber and still get items?
Yes, if it's less than 5,000, you can absolutely do that. You only have to have a pair form that for items that are over 5,000.
Okay, so I can still purchase items. Okay.
Yes. You have until, so Brandon, you have until June 30th to purchase items or to encumber them. So like if you place an order for something, as long as it's before June 30th, you're in good shape. You have until, I would plan on August 30th to liquidate that, which means to pay for it.
Okay, thank you.
Tony, could you say a little bit more about the leadership grants? I'm not clear on what that is exactly.
Yeah, so leadership grants are, so we have contracting grants with all of the CTSOs that we support. We have a leadership grant with IACTED. We have, and all that means is it comes out of our leadership funds. So there's 3 pools, right? There's admin, there's leadership, and then there's the distribution. Leadership grants are the ones that come out of the leadership funds. So CTSO support, the workplace specialist program with Dr. Lazarus, IACTED, there's a couple of others. I mean, we have some additional, like when we partner with Inspire Success to do some contracting work around like the standards and stuff, we use leadership funds. So that's all that means. It doesn't have anything to do with your distribution.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I am going to take your silence to say that, hey, we've covered everything and that everybody kind of feels comfortable with, hey, at least they have an idea of what the heck they're doing down there or up there, right? All right. If not, don't hesitate to reach out, give me a phone call and let me know. But I think I'm going to turn this over to Sam for a few updates around the legislative update, just to kind of fill you in on, we don't know, I mean, there's a lot of details that are left open at this point, but he'll at least give you an idea of some things that came through.
Great, thanks, Tony. And yeah, just with various questions that you might have on a lot of the things Tony walked through, generally best to send things to that CT email. Most of us have access to that, and we can kind of make sure we're not losing anything in the shuffle and get information out to you that we may need. All right, so yeah, just going to do a few minutes here on some legislative updates. Most of this was included in the newsletter that we sent out middle of last week, and I just dropped that in the chat, so you can see most of this there as well. But just wanted to run through a few things quickly. So the budget bill, which obviously goes into effect on July 1 for the next couple years. A couple of things in there that are of particular interest is that the line item for industry certifications moves from 200,000 to 2 million. So obviously that's a pretty significant increase that will go into effect for the upcoming year. For this current year, the line item is still 200,000. Most of you will recall that that was new last year, and we distributed out the 200,000 in the fall based on the data that you submitted into Inters through the spring and even through the summer, because we were providing you some clarification of what to include in all of that. So we will probably share a little bit more about that in the next newsletter, but basically the process will be the same this year, just based on any data that you put into Inters regarding certification exams that are taken, and then however much the amount you receive is based on all the data that is put in by everyone, and then we just distribute the $200,000 out at a flat rate to everyone. So that is the certification item. Christy, I see you potentially have a question on that.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I just want to be clear that that shift from 200,000 to 2 million, while that's a wonderful amount of money, that now goes to every single individual high school, correct?
Yes, but it's the same. It's actually the same language that they used for the 200,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that part is unchanged. Now,
yeah.
Obviously with so the important thing for the immediate purposes is that the process for this year will be the same. It'll be based on data that you submit for this school year, and we'll distribute the 200,000. With the 2 million that goes into effect next year, there are some aspects of 1002 that we need to sort out as well, because certifications are a approved expenditure for CSA accounts. And so we're going to need to work through some specifics there, and we'll share guidance at a later time. I see we have another question.
Sam, this is Stephen Duggan at Whitewater. Hey, I'm assuming this is pre you and Tony, I believe. I'm assuming that's going to be very similar to how incentive funds were distributed years ago. Is that correct, Tony? Does that sound right?
So that's kind of how we did the 200,000 last year. Is we did the incentive, kind of the incentive fund formula, like take the total number of certifications and divide out the pool of money by the number of certifications. That's what we're going to do this year. What Sam was alluding to with the 2 million, 1002 is going to make a little bit of difference on that. I think the other thing is the amount of money is going to make a difference. So we may need to consider like the actual exam costs when we're doing the 2 million, just because, I mean, we don't want to send out so much per exam that it actually exceeds the cost of some of the exams. I would tell you, and this is what I've been sharing with you for the last year or so, more than likely, the funds from the line item are going to go to the schools themselves. So you're going to want to work out some sort of an agreement with the school as far as covering certification costs. Whether you embed those in your tuition fees, whether you work on that at the end. I think we would have a terrible time if we're trying to figure in, you know, for each career center and each home district and what did the career center pay for and everything else. We're just going to have to go with like to the school itself. I think maybe part of what you were asking there though is, does this include private schools? And it does. It includes non-public schools as well.
Okay, that kind of answers my question. I know there's probably a lot more questions than answers with some of this right now with how fresh this is. I guess my next question, and feel free to virtually slap me here when I ask this, and I don't know if this is the time or the place. What's the thought process with the textbook reimbursement going forward? The rumor is $150 per student across the board, K to 12. My superintendents are extremely concerned because when you have some programs that have $400 for us in first year costs, such as COS and welding and things like that, we're going to consume the 150 and a lot more. Is there any consideration that the CTE line item for those will be carved out so that 150 isn't consumed by that? Or has anyone heard anything? Because I know there's a lot of questions and not very many answers regarding that.
So the CTE line item will not be, there is no carve out for a CTE line item. It's still part of the tuition support funding formula. It's not going to change in any way going forward. The one thing I would tell you is I think you will hear something from the department here relatively soon about, they've already contacted us about like CTE fees, whether or not they would be included in the textbook fees or not. They think that there may be some old legislation that would allow your CTE fees to stand, but where you couldn't do that if you were just purchasing textbooks and other items. But don't quote me on that, Steve. I think the most true statement is there's more questions than answers here right now, but I do know that is something that the department is looking into.
Thank you very much for that answer.
Hey, Tony, this is Jim. So this 2 million that we're getting.
Jim, can you hold on for just a second? Hillary had her hand up, and then I'll come back to you.
Go ahead.
Hi, Tony. So again, this probably is my newness, but we got a check for right under $2,000 that the district received. So that's what this money will be for. So it will just be earmarked for the general fund, is my understanding, and not any tied to the assessment reimbursement for students. Because right now we're passing that cost on to students as a fee.
Yeah, so this is a really good question. And again, you really ought to, ideally you wouldn't be doing that, but what we sent out last year was absolutely just more like an assessment reimbursement grant, goes to the school's general fund. I think the other part of this is that when we move forward, not for exams taken during the 22-23 year, because that's only going to be $200,000. But as we get into exams taken during 23-24, I think one of the things we're going to have to look at is, hey, if the school didn't pick up the cost of the exam, you're not going to be able to claim those. So we will, again, we're going to have to give out some more guidance here in the very near future on this, but we're just going to have to kind of look at all of the different implications that take place. The legislation actually says to reimburse students for it. Well, that would be nearly impossible for us to reimburse individual students. But I do know that something we've already talked about was Hey, if the school is charging the students and they're not paying for the exams, then we can't give that money back to the schools. So
Well, that's
we're
why
gonna have
the
to,
assessment grant was helpful, because then you can just pay for them right out of there.
yeah, the only problem with that is that assessment grant came out of our Perkins leadership and it wasn't sustainable. We couldn't do it any longer and be able to do the other programs and the other things that we needed to be able to do. So that's the reason why we did this. This 2 million, the 200,000 and the 2 million that we're moving towards is a state line item. It's out of the state budget. This is not out of Perkins dollars.
And then one more question with that. So thank you. The students, and I haven't gone through the spring Perkins cycle. I plan to go to a training next week. So again, this could be my own ignorance, but students that attempt the test and they don't pass it, how do we collect that data? Is that, do we report that in Inters? I guess I don't know. So like, I'm thinking we have, 20 students that are going to take the CCMA test, and that's quite expensive. It's $170, but I don't anticipate 20 passing it. How are we going to collect that data?
Francis Crowley.
Christy McBride,
Christy,
I
can you
think you're
mute yourself?
mute.
Sorry.
So
Thank you.
you can and you should submit data even if they don't pass it.
Okay.
Because the 200,000 has to be per attempt, not per pass.
Okay. Thank you.
And same thing going forward, but you can enter that into Inters as well. And I'm sure Jed and Chris include that as a part of their training.
Okay. Thanks.
Jim, let's go back to you.
Okay, so the assessment grants that we have for this year for 22-23 are to help pay the cost for the certifications that this year's seniors are taking. Well, it could be juniors even. But next year, moving forward, this $2 million is being sent straight to the schools, and they are then responsible for paying the certifications for their students. Is that a true statement?
So by assessment grant, are you talking about the ones that we distributed or the 200,000 from the state?
No, the ones you guys distributed, the ones that came to the districts.
Yeah, so the ones that went to the districts are, your amount is actually based upon the exams that you took the previous year.
Right.
But ideally that those funds should go towards paying for exams for this year.
Correct, but I'm saying that grant is going to disappear.
Yes.
We're not going to get it next year. And what I'm going to need to tell my principals is that this $2 million that's being sent to each of the schools is what they need to earmark to hold back and not spend it on something trivial, because they're going to need it to pay for next year's certification exams.
Yeah, but keep in mind that that's probably going to be paid out after like a year, just like we did, just like we're doing now with the 200,000. We're paying the 200,000 out for exams that are taken during 22-23, and we probably won't pay that until like September or October is when we paid it last year. Same thing with the 2 million going forward. Will more than likely be, by the time we collect all the data of the exams that were given, it'll probably be the fall after the 24 school year.
Yeah, so they're getting money after the fact.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Can your office send the directors a list of how much money each school got so that I can answer questions when the superintendent says, we got this random $200.15, but we don't know what it's from, and I can say that's your incentive money for your exams or your certification. Yeah. So
and, obviously it was, we can. There was a list that had to be posted on, I know it had to be posted, I thought it had to be posted on DOE's website, but we can find that list, but it talks about like how much each school got. We can send that out.
That'd be great. Thanks.
All right. Appreciate the questions there. And part of this is definitely, just for us to give a quick synopsis and then to hear the questions that you have as we try to, sort through these various things ourselves and develop guidance that we need to. So as you think of questions now or later, send those our way, and we'll continue to try to put together information. So the other thing with 1001, obviously there was some back and forth with CT funding there at the end of session, but basically things landed with the current way CT funding works being largely unchanged. And the only change is that the high value course funding is set to increase by 5% beginning next year. We're going to look at, obviously the funding memo for this upcoming year is already finalized and posted. We're working with DOE and DWD and seeing if we need to make an official change, or we can just kind of work on that on the back end. But the new funding levels are listed here and will go into effect for the upcoming year for the high value courses. All right, a couple people have reached out about 1591, which includes some language on virtual CTE courses. I know this is really small here, but you'll receive the slides afterwards, and I just copied the actual language in the bill. We are working with the respective legislators and making sure that we understand the intent of this provision, and then we'll be communicating with you. This one we're optimistic that we should be able to communicate with you pretty quickly here, hopefully in our next newsletter that will go out towards the end of the month, about how this language would change, if at all, our current policy. It's our reading of this that basically what this describes is what we already allow for funding under a hybrid program. But again, we're kind of working to make sure we understood the intent of this, and we'll share some guidance as we have more information. Anything you wanted to share there, Tony?
No, no.
Yeah,
we're good.
So again, we've gotten a couple questions on that, and we'll try to provide some more information here pretty shortly. Any other questions from folks on this particular provision? All right, and then obviously 1002 did end up passing in much of what was in the original bill is included in the final bill with some other things that were added on throughout the legislative session. You've probably been seeing some news articles and things as information gets out about this legislation. Obviously, this bill affects many more agencies than just us, and was a priority item for legislative leadership and others. So we're kind of in the still early stages of working with different departments to try to develop some shared guidance on the various provisions in the bill. And obviously our timeline is pretty accelerated, but those conversations are ongoing. On this particular bill, again, kind of as we, we're discussing some questions on the certifications piece. If you have questions that you personally have or questions that you're receiving regarding various components of 1002, definitely share those our way. That's will be very helpful as we continue to develop out guidance. I'm sure there will be some sort of FAQ document that will be developed with different agencies as this gets up and running. And obviously we've begun receiving questions as well. So let us know what you're hearing, what questions you have on the legislation. One component was, as we discussed previously on the call, obviously, is that the Perkins Authority has been moved from the cabinet over to CHE. And, Tony's been having some conversations with leadership and staff over at CHE, and we're working through how that will look, which will become effective on July 1st, along with the rest of the legislation. So that is what we had on the legislative side. Any questions for now? We have a few minutes. We have one or two more slides, but any other questions on 1002 or the legislative items that we touched on? All right.
Sam, this is Gene.
Yep. Yes, sir.
I believe in the budget line item, there was a reimbursement for dual credits as well, and the same as the certifications.
Well, there's the credential. Go ahead, Tony. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say there's the credential completion grant, but that's not really for dual credits.
But there is further incentive funding for the completion of credentials. That is a component of 1002, and will be an item we'll be working on with DOE to figure out how exactly that will function, particularly from a timing perspective, but then also just, what items are going to be eligible and various other components. But that is a significant component of the bill, is the credential completion grant within 1002 that is included in the state budget.
Gene, is that what you were referring to, or because there is also dual credit reimbursement for post-secondary institutions, but
Well, it was under the CTE piece along with the credentials in the proposed budget, the one sheeter that went out, and it was not in there this year, but it's in for the next 2 years. And
library.
there's a lot of conversation at the superintendent level about what that dual credit is. They thought it was for all dual credits. That they would be getting additional reimbursement for the dual credits earned by students.
Yeah, I think it's specific to credential completion, not dual credits. But
well, it did say credentials, and then it said certifications, and then it had, and I'm trying to find it, and then it said dual credits as a separate line.
Tony, can I add something real quick about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah. So Mark Schneider with Ivy Tech here. The state budget included $40 for every dual credit hour completed, but it's for core transfer library courses only. And then there's $2,500 for associate degrees that are completed by high school students, and $1,500 per Indiana College core. But that's the incentive funding for K-12 schools.
And Mark, that would go back to those schools that issue that associate's degree or those dual credits. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to work all of that out, but yeah, like your English 111 will get paid $120 per student now next year for every course that's offered for that. But yeah, it's going to go directly to the school district.
Thank you. That we were trying to get some clarification on that.
Yeah, I'll see if I have something. I'll try to put it in the chat here before we get done.
Thank you, Mark.
So you said, Mark, $40 per credit hour?
Yeah, for the core transfer library courses. There's like 70 of them, but they're generally the gen ed liberal arts courses.
Okay.
And what was the 1,500 you said, Mark? What was that for?
The Indiana College core.
Thank you.
Is that in addition to the $40 per credit hour?
My
Because I'm
understanding.
just thinking of things like
Yes.
the human anatomy that we do at the Career and Tech Center, like how those lines are going to be distinguishable. So, okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, anatomy is not on the core transfer library, but or at least I don't believe it is. But yeah, it should be.
Oh, I thought it was under the science. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go back and take a look at that to see if it impacts like CT credits that we have available. The only ones that I could see it maybe impacting would be the, I do think like principles of business management and stuff like that would include like an intro to business course, which I do believe is on there.
Yeah, there's also like a couple of accounting classes as well. There's a handful, but not many, like maybe 5.
So, all right. Any other questions about that?
Yeah, one more quick question, just to clarify on that $1,500. What's the requirement? Is that just if they're taking classes, the school gets $1,500 per student, or
They have to earn it's $1,500 for every Indiana College Core that's earned. So if your graduating class has whatever 15 students that are earning that 30 credit hour block of the Indiana College Core, then that school district will get reimbursed $1,500 per student that earns that. And then that's 30 credit hours from the core transfer library. So you'd also get the $40 per credit hour, so whatever that is, $1,200 over the course of their career on top of that as well.
And Mark, half of those 30 have to be taken with Ivy Tech, correct?
Not necessarily. Most schools have agreements with us. There are a handful of agreements with IU, and VU has a good amount as well. But the schools will have to designate an Indiana College Core post-secondary provider.
Okay, we can talk later. I thought that we'd been told something different, so thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We will take a look at that and see if there's an impact on like CTE courses, and then we'll share that out as well. We'll make sure that we have that. We'll have that in the next part. Just a couple other quick items here. We only had about 20 waivers, which is a really good thing, which means that the adoption forms are helping with that. So we have been doing waivers. We've done the initial review. We're going to try to get those sent back out by the end of next week as far as the final approval process on those. Keep in mind, like, we realize that all through the summer, you may be hiring staff members and you need to do a licensure waiver. So you can continue to submit licensure waivers as needed, going into the fall. The adoption forms, the one thing that I would share on the adoption forms that I was going to talk about earlier is, so once we have all the local applications approved and finalized, we will take that information, all the questions that you answered, all the programs that are in there, and we are going to roll that into your local application. We have to do that to meet federal requirements. Once we have that information in there, then the forms and the questions, all of that will get reviewed as a part of that annual review process. All right, so that was part of the reason why we said the May 1st deadline. That's also why we can be a little bit flexible with this, but just know that if we get to a point where we roll that in and you haven't answered the questions or you don't have any programs of study entered in there, then that's going to show up like as we do the review process. So that's the reason why we were kind of targeting that deadline. Again, this is only for your Perkins managed programs or your Perkins funded programs. Doesn't necessarily mean every program that's being offered at every single school that you have there. Next newsletter, we're hoping to put one more out before the last week of May. We will, if we're going through the summer and we get more information, like around 10:02 or the online and virtual or anything along those lines, we will certainly share that out. But that'll be our last newsletter for the school year. The next newsletter then that we would plan on offering would be sometime in July when we get back in session and when the Office of CTE would officially be a part of the Commission for Higher Ed. We are not planning webinars for June and July through the Office of CTE. I don't know the exact dates that Jed and Chris have for their summer trainings, but obviously they have announced those and they have taken care of that. And then just a quick note here, summer conference there's the pre-conference session in Columbus. on June 5th, and then June 6th and 7th is the actual summer conference. Sarah or Tracy, is there anything that you need to add regarding that?
No, I think that we will get that agenda sent out later this week. We just have a few things that we want to solidify, but keep an eye out soon, and we're looking forward to seeing everyone.
And I do know Tracy has asked, I know at least like Chris and myself, to be there and available for the roundtable sessions on the 7th. So we do plan to be there. And Tracy, if I failed to send you back that email, I apologize, but I do plan to be there on the 7th.
Okay, great. I'll mark you down. Thanks, Tony.
All right. So, all right. If nothing else, I mean, as always, feel free to send us an email. Again, if it's really urgent, your best bet is to kind of send it to cte@gov.gov or .in.gov. Certainly make sure that you're sending all of your reimbursement requests and all of the budget mods and those things to that email address as well. That'll help us to make sure that we don't get lost in the shuffle. Anything else for the good of the cause, Mr. Kovach?
Not for me. I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining in today. And if we don't talk to you before then, have a great summer.